Hello, everyone. My name is Mariana, and I am an educator at the Natural History Museum of Utah. And I want to welcome everyone to our question and answer session of the Research Quest Live. So if you want to leave a question for our guest today, just please press the Ask a Question button or leave a comment on Facebook because we're getting all of your questions. And today we have a really special guest. We are going to talk with Dr. Mark Loewen. He's a paleontologist research associate at the Natural History Museum of Utah. So hello, Mark. Thank you so much for being here today. And how are you?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here. And I wanted to start just asking you to explain your research. If you can explain a little bit about what you do. Yeah.
So you guys have been playing around with bones from the Cleveland-Lloyd dinosaur quarry.
Yes.
I've spent a lot of time studying those bones and looking at different animals like Allosaurus, which you can see behind me. I look at young Allosaurus and how they grow up to be large adults, like you see behind me. So it's a lot of fun. Lots of measuring bones and looking at thousands and thousands of bones from that quarry.
Awesome. That's great. And we have some questions about the quarry. We had two other paleontologists yesterday talking about the research there. So, and we have some questions about it. So that's going to be awesome. Let's start with a more light question. So Rowan Olive from New York City is asking, what is your favorite fossil that you have found?
I've found a lot of fossils. Some of my favorites that I've found have been horned dinosaurs. So definitely like the horned dinosaurs, definitely like the tyrannosaurs, things like that.
That's awesome. That's really great. So we have a question here. Bernadette from New York City is also from New York City is asking, did some dinosaurs have feathers? I think you have answered this one before, but I think it's an interesting question.
We have every different type of dinosaur has the potential to have feathers. So the entire group of dinosaurs potentially could have feathers. Not every single dinosaur does have feathers. If you think about things like Allosaurus, which you've been looking at today, we do not have skin with feathers for Allosaurus, but we do have leather skin with scales. So it doesn't mean Allosaurus didn't have feathers, but so far we haven't found feathers on Allosaurus, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Sure, that's great. And since we were talking about the Allosaurus, I was there in the press conference when you were showing the new species of Allosaurus. And can you tell us a little bit about the species? How long did it take to realize that it was a new species? And how do you know that it was another species of Allosaurus?
So yes, in January, we announced a new species of Allosaurus. The animal you see behind me, you can see if we look at his skull has kind of a curve along the bottom of the skull. If you look at this Allosaurus, it doesn't have the same curve. It's much straighter across here. So that's one of the main differences between these two species. This species of Allosaurus, which we just named Allosaurus jim-madsoni, this one actually lived before Allosaurus fragilis, which is the one that we find in the Cleveland-Lloyd dinosaur quarry. So it's been a lot of fun looking at it. We've had an idea that this is a new species for over 20 years. But it took a long time to do all the research and look at every Allosaurus skull all over the world to figure out which one was actually a different one.
That's really cool. So it takes a long time. And I had
sometimes
a question.
Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow.
I can't imagine. So we had a question yesterday from Allison from Park City. She was asking, how long does it take to dig up a dinosaur fossil? And I think yesterday our paleontologists, they answered that it varies a lot, that some people may take years and years. So how long does it normally take for you? Because you said you found a lot of fossils.
So it depends. We do a lot of work in southern Utah in Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. when we find a fossil there, we'll probably find it this year. And then we'll ask the government for permission to dig a giant hole and dig it up. So we'll go back next year to actually dig it up. And usually, depending on the size of the dinosaur, it will take between a week to a month to dig up all the bones from that dinosaur. And then we have to take it back to our museum here in Utah. Often that takes a helicopter to take it out of the field to a road. Then we have to put it on a truck and take the truck back to Salt Lake City. So that's 4 or 5 months after we've dug it up and prepared it. Then it comes back to Salt Lake City, and sometimes it'll take 1 to 4 years to prepare all of the bones out of the rock matrix. So it depends.
Wow, yeah, it's a long process. We have another question from New York City. Marlo is asking, how many full dinosaur skeletons have you found? Like full?
I have never found a complete dinosaur skeleton with every bone in it. Those are very, very rare. I've been fortunate enough to work on several almost complete dinosaur skeletons, but still have not worked on one that's where we're not missing a single bone.
Wow. Yeah, that's
one of the main reasons for that is if we're going to find the dinosaur, usually we have to find pieces of bone sticking out of the hill, which means some of them have rotted away and gone to nothing. So it's almost impossible to find a complete dinosaur with every bone because you don't know where to dig.
Awesome. Yeah. So that's usually what we tell students when they ask us. We're like, oh, so you remember the scenes in Jurassic Park? No, that's it. So speaking of finding the new bones, can you tell us a little bit about the recent finding about the Spinosaurus tail? I don't know if you saw it. I think it came out like last week, and we were all like in the team talking about it, like waiting if you could tell us what you think about it and what do you think that means. Like, I think we get some
Spinosaurus is a really cool dinosaur. It was found by the Germans in Egypt, and the American bombers during World War II bombed the museum that it was in. So we actually lost all of the evidence of Spinosaurus in 1944.
That's so
sad. But then recently we've been finding bones in Morocco, and those bones turn out to be the same animal that lived in Egypt as Spinosaurus. And in 2008, one of my paleontologist colleagues was at a market in Morocco, and a man had bones that looked like Spinosaurus. And so he collected those bones and wrote up and said, hey, maybe Spinosaurus lives in the water. We know that Spinosaurus has teeth that are good for eating fish. It's got a skull that's good for eating fish. It's not surprising that this animal might spend some time in the water. But really, it was suggested that this animal always pretty much lived in the water. Well, just last week, a new paper came out showing a bizarre tail on this animal.
Bizarre tail, yeah.
Yeah, the tail's really big, but if you look at the sail on the back, so is that. So actually, a few of my colleagues would argue that even though it has this bizarre tail, it still may not be used for swimming because some of the bones, if we compare it to a crocodile has a much more muscular tail for swimming. This has a big sail. We're not sure exactly what that's used for, just like we're not sure exactly what the sail on the back of the animal is used for. But certainly this thing spent some time in the water.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really, really cool. And it doesn't mean like anything like for the like classification of it, like it doesn't mean like is it still like a dinosaur? That would be my question.
It's absolutely still a dinosaur. It's just a group of dinosaurs that really went towards specialization of probably eating fish, maybe living some of the time in the water, and maybe just looking really pretty. Those sails on the back of those animals, they like that. So that might be, if you think about the horns on a dinosaur or the spikes on an ankylosaur, those are the same sort of thing, where it's a really pretty object that the dinosaurs like.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you. So before we go to our next question, I just want to remind everybody who's watching that if you have a question, just please press the Ask a Question button or leave a comment on Facebook for us. So now we have a question about the Cleveland Lloyd quarry. And that's something that we all wanted to know. And someone asked, Alexander asked from Salt Lake City, and is asking, how do you think the dinosaurs in Cleveland Lloyd got there? I think that's a question everybody wants to know. Yeah, and he's asking if you think that could be like a drought or like a bloat and float, like, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm the guy who came up with bloat and float.
Okay.
If you actually look at the bones are scattered all over in the quarry, but there are actually chunks of animals that are together, like one animal fell apart in a single place. We have Ceratosaurus. That dinosaur is actually a single animal from a single part of the quarry. We have chunks of Allosaurus that are the same thing. We have 5 stegosaurs. They're all together as well. So I think it's bodies coming together in water. And if we look at the sediments around the bones, the sediments are very consistent with the mud at the bottom of a pond or a lake. We actually know that this mud continues for many, many years after the dinosaur bones were deposited. And it's an extensive lake that covers a large portion of the site. So yeah, I'm convinced that these animals died in a giant flood. In 1993, I saw a giant flood on the Missouri River, and a cornfield 1 mile away from the river was flooded with 6 feet of water, and there were 12 dead cows floating in a circle in that cornfield. So this is the type of scenario where you're not actually in the river channel, but you're up off of the banks of the river, and that area collected these dinosaurs, became a lake afterwards. That's what seems to make the most sense to me.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, we've I think everybody was like asking themselves like why, because we were investigating it, like, as you know, like in the Cleveland Lloyd investigations, like students were like wondering, why do you have like all this juvenile Allosaurus there? Like, why so many like carnivores? And yesterday, Dr. Warlock and Peterson, they were talking about like maybe some behavioral theories, like behavioral causes. So yeah, I think everybody was like, wow, what is like, why is that? Wow, like what happened? So yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
So here's another thing. If you think about Allosaurus, there's a lot of Allosaurus in the quarry. Mm-hmm. But Allosaurus is full of air sacs. Allosaurus might actually float better than some of the other meat-eating dinosaurs. I mean, it's pretty clear that it's the most common predator in the entire ecosystem, just looking at all the different states where we find dinosaurs. But there could be something about the skin and air sacs in Allosaurus that allows it to float together and collect a big group. At the same time, you could have had a herd of Allosaurus, if they're actually social, trying to cross the river, collecting together upstream. All of these dinosaurs died upstream, in my mind.
That's so interesting. We didn't know about that. And how can you know about this part of like them like being, sorry, I'm asking a question because I'm not a paleontologist. So about like them being like more likely to float. How can you know about that from like the fossils?
So we know from their anatomy, if we look at, here's the skull of Allosaurus. This entire opening right here is an air sac.
Okay.
So the skull is full of air. If we actually look at the backbone, there's air sacs all the way down the backbone, all the way to the hips. So this actually had lungs like a bird, a flow-through lung, where there's air sacs all through the soft tissue as well. So that's one of the things that we know, that was a much lighter animal than something like Stegosaurus, which doesn't have those air sacs.
Okay, that's so cool. Thank you so much for explaining. And also about the Cleveland Lloyd, we were seeing today that it was found like a dinosaur egg there, right? So do you know what dinosaur this egg is from, and how can we know?
I know. So one egg was found.
Okay.
There doesn't seem to be an embryo inside of it, although a paper has come out saying maybe there's an embryo. I don't think anybody can really see an embryo in it. So we have an egg. It's about the size of an avocado, about that big. So it's really cool. The most common dinosaur in Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry is Allosaurus. So therefore, that egg must be Allosaurus. But the cool thing is you could actually take eggshells and you can slice them and look at them under a microscope and tell different types of eggshell within dinosaurs, birds, crocodiles. So this has a special type of eggshell. And a few years ago, we found eggshell in Wyoming with a tiny, tiny, tiny little bone from the front of the skull. And it turns out Allosaurus is the only animal in its ecosystem that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bones, 5 teeth in its premaxilla bone. So this tiny premaxilla, about the size of my pinky nail, actually is a tiny baby Allosaurus. And it was inside that egg. And that eggshell type is the same type as we find in Cleveland Lloyd.
Okay.
So the cool thing is Cleveland Lloyd has one Allosaurus egg, and it probably was ejected from the female in the stress of dying. It hadn't formed its embryo yet, but it's a complete round egg.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. Thank you so much. That's so awesome. We have a question from Allison from Park City. She's asking, what's the biggest dinosaur you have dug up?
Unfortunately, I've dug up some long-necked dinosaurs. You can imagine a dinosaur like this takes a long time to dig up.
Yeah.
They are not my favorite kind of dinosaur to dig up. That's for sure.
I can imagine. I can imagine it takes some time. Isabella from New York City is asking, what was the first dinosaur bone you ever found?
First dinosaur bone I ever found. I guess it was a piece of blue T-Rex bone. So that was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. And you were like, studying. You were like,
Yeah, I was a PhD student, and yeah, we went up to look for dinosaur bones, and the first piece of bone I found was a little piece of Tyrannosaurus.
That's really cool. I think a lot of our students would love to like have like the Tyrannosaurus to be the first one they found.
Right.
That's really cool. That's awesome. And before we continue, I just want to remind everybody who's watching that if you want to leave a question, just press the ask a question button or leave a comment on Facebook for us. We have a question here. Oh, Daniela from New York is asking, have you found more than one fossil in one place?
Yes. And if you look at the Cleveland Lloyd dinosaur quarry, over 20,000 bones have come from that place that's the size of a Wendy's restaurant.
Wow.
So,
That's so cool. So Elia and Bernice from Manhattan, they're asking, what was the rarest fossil you ever found?
Lots of fossils we find are actually known from 1 or 2 bones. So that's something cool. Right now I'm working on a little baby tyrannosaur. Well, it's a tiny tyrannosaur that had a skull about this long. The question was, is it a baby or is it a small animal? So we had to look at special things on the surface of the bone to figure out whether it was an adult or a juvenile. And we're hoping to name that sometime this year.
So cool. Oh, and can you explain to us a little bit more? How do you know if it's like a juvenile, like this like specific features in the bone, and like that you know if it's like an adult or a juvenile? And how do you know if it's like a female or a male?
So there's 2 ways we can tell a female dinosaur from a male dinosaur. If the female is laying eggs right about the time that it dies, it's actually taking calcium out of its bones to make into the egg. So it's resorbing some of the parts of its bones. And if it dies right during that season and we cut the leg bone and see that resorption ring, we can say this is probably a female. At the same time, we have found dinosaurs with eggs inside of them. That's the best way to tell. So if it has eggs inside of it, it's a female. The cool thing is dinosaurs lay 2 eggs at a time. Because birds have 1 ovary, dinosaurs had 2. So birds have gotten rid of 1 to become flyers, to lighten the system up. But every dinosaur lays 2 eggs at a time, which is pretty cool. At least meat-eating dinosaurs.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. And related to birds, we have a question. Alexander from Salt Lake City is like, speaking of dinosaur air sacs, do you think that dinosaurs could have a bird-style flow through lung?
Yeah, it's pretty clear that at least meat-eating dinosaurs had that kind of lung.
Awesome. And that related
Same thing with the biggest dinosaurs ever. These guys also had air sacs all the way down their neck and all the way into their abdomen, and almost certainly had a flow-through lung.
Awesome. Thank you. And that relates to a question Andy from Salt Lake City is asking, are there any dinosaurs still alive?
There are over 12,000 species flying around you today. Every bird today is a dinosaur. So if you always wondered, what did dinosaur taste like? The answer is probably tastes like chicken.
Probably tastes like chicken. Is awesome.
Or
We have a question, another question from Alexander from Salt Lake City. It looks like he watched like your other interviews, like with us in Research Quest, and he was asking, he was saying that you showed a cast of a new ceratopsian frill, and where was the original fossil found? And he also asked if, like, what was like your favorite ceratopsian?
So here's a piece of a new dinosaur that we're naming. This is the back head shield that goes way back behind the head. And this was found near Escalante, Utah, at the top of a hill called Death Ridge. So this is locally known as the Death Ridge ceratopsian. Each one of these pits is a place for a horn to come off. So we're working on figuring out exactly what this animal looked like and giving it a name. But my favorite ceratopsian is Styracosaurus because it has the most longest, coolest horns.
That's awesome. So I have a question here about Cleveland-Lloyd again. In Cleveland-Lloyd, we saw that there were like blank squares on the map because those fossils were found before 1960. So our friend who was teaching our class, Aiden, she was asking, how did paleontologists work with fossils before good records were kept?
So actually, some of those blank squares are just times when they didn't collect the data. It's even after 1960. So sometimes at the end of the season, you know, people just pick up the bones and go, different reasons like that. Yeah, it doesn't actually, the bones were just as dense in those squares as they are everywhere else, but the data got lost or things like that.
Awesome. And but how did they like worked, like the paleontologists worked like before, like having more like data? Because yeah,
so
you were talking
even the cowboy paleontologists in the 1800s, they actually made rudimentary maps, not the same way that we do it today. And today sometimes we use photogrammetry, so we take pictures so we can have a 3D model of where everything is. There's one block of Utah raptors that we dug up in 2007. And this block will still be worked on 50 years from now, long after I'm dead. And slowly we're documenting the thousands of bones in that block, which is really exciting, but it's going to take forever.
It's going to take forever, yeah. I can't imagine that. So we have a question here because we have a lot of like students who are like tuning up with us like in the classes, and they're interested in being paleontologists, like our friend Allison from Park City. So how can young paleontologists get involved?
So just keep looking, you know, at your schoolwork, go to the museum, talk to paleontologists there. We have some people that work in the lab, although I think you have to be a little bit older. And we have some people that come out to the field and help us dig. So volunteers are a very important part of how the museum usually works. None of us can go into the museum right now, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But, you know, back when life returns to normal, yeah, there's lots of volunteers who help us dig up dinosaurs.
Awesome. Yeah, that's so cool. Thank you. And before we finish, we have a question also from Alexander from Salt Lake City. What's your favorite dinosaur book? And if you ever read the novel Jurassic Park?
I did read the novel Jurassic Park, and it was awesome.
Oh, great.
Really a brilliant book, written by a brilliant scientist who became an author. The book was groundbreaking. What is my favorite dinosaur book? That's a hard one. The Dinosaur Heresies by Robert Bacher, Dr. Bob Bacher. That really popularized the idea that dinosaurs were birds. His professor, John Ostrom, was the first person in the last 60 years to really prove that birds came from dinosaurs. And that was in 1969. Then his student, Bob Bacher, took and popularized it with this book, Dinosaur Heresies. And then literally Jurassic Park, the book, and the movie are an outgrowth of the influence of that book.
That's so cool. Yeah, my friend Aiden here, she says that she likes the Raptor Red book. I don't know if you heard about it.
I'm aware of it.
Okay. So I think we're out of time. So I'm sorry because like this interview was so fast. Thank you so much for participating. That was like awesome. Thank you.
Again, my pleasure.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for everybody who's watching. Please come and participate to our class, 9:30 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. We're going to continue digging our dinosaurs and working with Cleveland Lloyd Quarry. So come tomorrow with Aiden and see you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark.